Hi, why is color important in UI design, and how can you pick a great color scheme for your next design project? In this snippet from one of our recent events, we'll share just that. An experienced UI designer, Olga, will take you through things to consider when choosing a color palette, things to avoid, and how to pick the right color scheme. If you're interested in more webinars like this, you can click the link in the description. Also, if you want to learn more about this topic, subscribe to our YouTube channel for weekly UX and UI videos. Let us know in the comments if you have any questions around this topic. Now, let's dive in.
When I ask you, what is your favorite color? Most of the times you have a pretty defined answer. And this answer is also very specific to majority of people, where we see that a lot of people actually do prefer blue. It could be related to the religion, could be related to the fact that it is a calming color. We don't really know. Reality is your users do have very specific preferences. Nevertheless, it doesn't mean that you have to use that color just because user liked it, but perhaps the best would be to choose a color based on its meanings. Although the users will have a preference, they will definitely relate to product that communicates their personality. And this is the personality that you want to convey through the color. So what I'm trying to do through this presentation would be to teach you how to fish. And so don't expect a lot of examples. We'll go through the meaning of the colors, and you will see how you can adjust and find what you're looking to communicate and apply it to your branding, to your app, to your website, wherever you're using colors. Most important for working with color is to produce the palettes that are soft and very balanced. And as we see in this product, as an example here, the Fabulous app, it is using quite a lot of colors, but they are still very well balanced together. We will see later in the end, towards the end, how this happens and what is the trick to convey that, to achieve that. So most of the time, oversaturated color experience would be very, very uncomfortable. So what we want to achieve is going from this left spectrum to something that is more harmonious and more pleasant to our eyes, because most of the times users will actually look into, or you want your users to look into your product more often. So you don't want them to run away the first time they see it and look to the side because it was overpowering. So think about how these colors work together. And the trick to achieve that would be to use a color scheme that can be created by Adobe Color, for example. The way it works is we select a main color, we select one color, and then we select what type of scheme do we want. If we want an analogous scheme, it will be quite similar. It will be a spectrum of colors that are very close to each other. If we go into monochromatic, it will be only one color. So this is perhaps the hardest choice in order to ensure that it's not too boring, but it's also it still communicates and still grabs users' attention to the right elements. Then we can think of triad applications. So it is based on three separate colors that are equally distant on the color wheel. And the recommendation here would be to use one color as dominant and the others as accent. So there is still a primary color and the others are just added for smaller sections or less important areas. Then we have complementary scheme, which is the opposite side of the spectrums. It is a mix of those colors, so it creates the highest color contrast. The split complementary would be taking the main color and the colors next to it its complementary. Then if we look into proportions, the trick here is actually to think of, if we have a very saturated color, very bright, very vibrant orange, we should combine it with a neutral one. And the ratio here should be actually that bright colors take us much smaller areas than the colors that are more neutral. So the specific example here would be to use the 60-30-10 rule, where we use the 60 for the main primary color, which is mostly used for backgrounds, 30% for the color that is mostly used for typography and other graphic elements, while only 10% is used for the most important elements of the design, where we want to grab users' attention and interact with. In as very concrete example, we have the IBM Security Cloud application that shows us this in the dark mode, which is following the same principle. If we use it in light mode, the white and the black would just be inversed. So we will still have 60% white, 30% black or gray, and then the 10% would still be our accent color. Then going into the accessibility, which is a topic that is a lot of time forgotten, but we should definitely think about it, because not only there's a lot of people that are colorblind, and we should still cater for making sure that all our products are inclusive and we don't exclude any users, despite their vision being different from ours. But ultimately, even if you don't care about your user, you should still consider that the European Accessibility Law is actually something that we need to all take into account when designing our digital products. So it is essential to have compatibility with this color contrast and color usage. So what we need to consider is to not to convey meaning with only color. So one specific example is when we use a favorite button and we use the same element but just with the color difference, it will be seen pretty much the same way if it doesn't have a different design, if we just use only simply color to signify the difference. But if we use an outline, for example, colorblind users will also see that, and it will actually be clearer for everyone. So other way is to think of focus and interactive states. So how can we ensure that it is not just color and meaning through color? So one example would be to use a darker shade, for example, which will still be seen by colorblind people. So while we were using a white text on a darker background, when we hover over this button, it would use a dark text over a yellow background. And then when on click, it would simply become darker, even darker. So we also don't want to have a very big disparity between the hover effect and the click, because it's a very quick instance that happens very quickly. Then we get into color contrast, which is a very, very disputed topic, but pretty much it is a very simple factor. It is the difference between luminance, between the two colors. So the brightest luminous, the whiter will be the color. The darkest luminous, the black will be the color. It has absolutely nothing to do with the hue itself, because you could still have a light luminance for blue or a dark luminance for yellow, even though you will perhaps not call it yellow anymore, and more likely brown. Some of the tools that we can use to experiment with this color theory would be color blindly. Specifically for when we talk about accessibility, I like to use this Chrome plugin simply for to see how my apps, to put myself in the user's shoes, to see how the users that would be colorblind would see specific images, specific websites. How that is that experience. Another plugin that I use, not plugin, but website that I use often, quite often in my products, it would be to check the color contrast ratio. So the way it works is you simply put the foreground color, you put the background color, and then it gives you the color contrast. It tells you if it passes the normal text, or you can only use it in large text, like in this case, if you want a really compliant application. But nevertheless, my recommendation is simply to pass the AA test ratio. because if the user is as colorblind as AAA group, or the accessibility, or if it requires an accessibility of AAA group, then it simply means that most of the times these users already are using enhancements for their software that would allow them to see other products that are more performant as well. Another example would be the accessible colors, where you provide an example, or even start with an example, and you can just adjust it. So you give a color and it gives you a color that will match it. In the material palette, it actually checks your contrast if you should use white or black with that specific color. And in the color save, it's also quite creative, because you then simply just give one color and it gives you a range of colors that you can use with it. So typically mistakes, and this is something that I've seen through previous students, through other designers that I worked with, and in many other portfolio websites out there. The primary one is using too many colors. So don't abuse it. This is pretty much how it will look like if you use more than the necessary colors in your designs. You're simply not calling any attention to what's really important. Everything is flashing and screaming for attention in your product. And another very common mistake is adding backgrounds, adding color to the backgrounds. So we don't not necessarily need to use color in wide sections. Specifically, when we use it in backgrounds, it actually gets in the way. Perhaps a look that would be more modern would be to simply use a gray background, a light gray background. And if we want the input to stand out, we could make it white, and even though it's not so prominent, it will still highlight this input. Then the trick here would be to not use pure black and together with pure white. So if we look into these two examples, there is a reason that the right side is actually easier to read, because it is, even though I'm using, as you've seen in this slide, it does look like white and does look like black. Nevertheless, I'm using tonalities, or it has a little bit of tone of gray into it already, so it's not pure. My favorite is FD for white. It's a color that I very commonly use in my UI, in the products that I design. Then on the black side, it actually depends if you want to give it a more stronger feel or you want to soften it. So it will be the grayer, the softer you want the product to be. Then another mistake is speaking about using gray, is using way too many grays. So at some point you start lacking contrast if you start using grays that are too close to each other, or more towards the center of the spectrum of gray color. So think about which interface is more appealing and which one stands out most. It's perhaps the one that doesn't overuse grays as much. Lastly, it is about contrast. And when we think of contrast, we usually think in black and white, but not only. A lot of times there's also contrast in terms of color. And the example that I see very often is using white on yellow background. So it is completely inaccessible. So please don't do that. And the reason that, speaking about contrast, the reason that this hurts your eyes and why op art so much exploited this concept that pretty much makes it look like it's dancing in your eyes, it's because there's definitely no contrast here. So when we think about luminosity, these colors are very close to each other in terms of the light spectrum, in terms of luminance. So if I turn this image into black and white, and you will see that the circles are still there in some cases, because the tonalities are too close to each other. So they all have the same luminance. That's why they kind of vibrate in our eyes. And this is why, when mentioning the Fabulous app, I consider it so well designed, because even if we turn into grayscale, it still has a lot of contrast, and it still works. This super bright and colorful application still works really, really well together.
Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this webinar presented by Olga. What was the main takeaway from this video for you? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos like this. If you're interested in learning more about UX and UI, we have a free short course for you. The link for that is in the description. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.